evening and welcome to the Writer's Block. I'm your host, John Ronan, and during our half-hour episodes, I interview writers about their craft, what they're working on now, what they've succeeded at in the past, what they might be planning for the future. We talk to poets, we talk to journalists, we talk to editors. We even have other brands of artists on the show. We've had on musicians and actors, sculptors. It's a pretty wide net we cast here. And if you have an idea for a guest who might be good for the Writer's Block, please watch for our address at the end of the program. We'd be glad to get your suggestions for future guests. I also want to remind you that Cape Ann TV produces the Writer's Block, as it has for 24 years, and we're proud of this show, as well as all the others produced here. It's part of the cable access programming that's created right here on Cape Ann for Essex, Manchester, Gloucester, and Rockport. You can't get that with disc. I want to remind you of that while you're watching the show. This is a cable service. Tonight, I'm happy to say we do have a writer. His name is William Sargent, and he has published many books. The most recent is The View from Strawberry Hill, Reflections on the Hottest Year on Record. I'm going to hold this up immediately so that I can find out if that's glaring or if that's a good shot from our camera person, Casey, and ask her if that's coming in loud and clear or coming across. She's giving me a thumbs up. Good. William Sargent, who wrote The View from Strawberry Hill, spent a lot of time in Orleans on the Cape and other locations on the Cape and northward on the ocean. He went to school and was a biology major at Harvard University, and later worked for a number of years at Woods Hole doing biological research. He now lives in Ipswich and has lived there since about 2000, having migrated from the South Shore. And I'm going to finish my intro by reading just one paragraph from the back of The View from Strawberry Hill. Science writer William Sargent had intended to take a break from writing about the world's environmental crises to tend to his own garden. Yet, as the hottest year on record unfolded with a series of massive fires, floods, and the most devastating storm ever to hit the East Coast, it became increasingly difficult to keep the focus inward. William Sargent, welcome to the Writer's Block.
Thank you very much.
Thanks for coming down.
Pleasure to be here.
What year was this terrible year? Remind us.
Well, it was calendar year 2012. But I actually start the book, and to my mind, the year started actually right around this time. If you'll remember, in 2011, we had an October storm, the end of October, and we had 3 feet of snow. It was a real rogue storm, and then, you know, we thought we were, going to have this terrible winter, and then after that, it was like you flipped a light switch. All of a sudden, everything got warm. The forsythia came out. The lilacs started blooming, and the temperatures went up into the 60s and 70s, even into the 80s, and it stayed that way, month after month. And I'd be writing about these things, and all of a sudden we would have, the hottest January on record. Then we would have the hottest February on record.
Remember, we had no winter that year.
Yeah, and then we had the 3 hottest months on record, and that just kept on going right through the year. And of course, the year ended with Hurricane Sandy, which is, we're close to that anniversary right now.
So we're taping here in the fall. Yeah. Almost exactly a year from Hurricane Sandy.
Exactly. So, on this night last year, I was out filming some people in Plum Island, and they were doing what's called beach scraping. So they were scraping sand off the low tide and then creating an artificial dune up against these houses. And there was a guy who had his stairs that came out from the front of the house to the top of the dune. Well, the next day, in 2 high tides, the first high tide swept 30 feet of sand away. The second high tide swept another 10 feet of sand away, and those stairs were hanging, 40 feet up in the air, just on two high tides.
You mentioned in the book that the
Yeah.
city fathers have been trying to get people to take these beachfront homes down
Yeah.
without success,
Yeah.
but the storm did that work for them
Exactly.
and kind of cleared,
Yeah.
cleared the ground quite literally.
Yeah, yeah. The same thing is true, actually, if you look at what happened with Hurricane Sandy. Exactly the same thing had happened in what was called the Ash Wednesday storm in 1962, and 145,000 houses from Cape Cod to Florida were all tumbled into the ocean. And basically, those were the houses that were rebuilt and then were knocked down again with Hurricane Sandy.
Not a lot of hope for a race, I don't think sometimes. In the fall of 2011, at the very beginning
Right.
of this hot stretch, did this book occur to you then, and the sort of dated diary style that you used?
No, it was really only after a couple months, and then I realized something's pretty strange here, and really, people will look at that and say, well, that's global warming. It was probably 50% global warming, but the other 50% is we switched from El Nino to La Nina, and that's a pattern in the Pacific where you get a patch of warm water, and then that changes the weather system all across the United States, and it's instant. As soon as the water temperatures, rise at a particular spot, then you'll see these changes. And then it will last for months and months and sometimes years.
I want to talk a little bit and ask you a couple questions about the style of the book.
Right.
This is very much like a diary.
Right.
You have dates in here.
Yeah.
Not every single date.
Right.
But a chapter will have, it might say
Right,
chapter
yeah.
heading, then have a date, a
Yeah.
specific date. And I'm just looking here at June 29.
Yeah.
And so you have the events.
Right, yeah.
That makes it very personal, a very,
Yep.
very readable, smooth book.
Thank
with
you.
some personal incidents and also a lot of good science.
Yeah.
Is that your preferred style, and have you used that before?
Pretty much. I try to write, for the general audience. Actually, my first book was a companion book to a Nova film about a year in the life of a bay down on Cape Cod. So that's pretty much the audience that I aim for. It's a it's a non-technical audience, but an intelligent audience that are going to be interested in the
So they're
subject
educated, but not necessarily scientists.
Exactly, exactly, and I like to have a more informal style, and in some books you actually need. I don't like to do it too much, but sometimes you need to bring yourself into the story as a vehicle to move the narrative arc forward, if you will. Yeah.
There's one incident in the book where you think you're having a heart attack, the big
Yeah.
one, as you say.
Right, yeah.
Which
Yeah.
clearly it didn't happen.
Oh,
Can you
I
give
don't
us a
think
little
so.
background on that?
Well, it really, I think it really came from the heat. It was when we were having that oppressive heat, and I had a kind of a grueling schedule. I had several lectures, and I was doing some book signing and things on the Cape, and we went to a whole bunch of bookstores, and I wasn't drinking very much. I got dehydrated, and then all of a sudden, my heart went into overdrive. And I was down on the Cape, and I figured, well, this isn't good, and I want to get home, before anything bad happens.
If I have a heart attack, I want to be at home.
Yeah, exactly. And when I went into the Beverly Hospital and told them this, they chided me incredibly for not going to the hospital.
Well,
right
the
down.
temperatures we had that year, a lot of 80s and a lot of 90s,
Yeah.
have to be taken very seriously.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, yeah. And something like that creeps up on you. You don't think about it. You're going around. I think we even had an air-conditioned car, but I just kept pushing and pushing, and not drinking, and that'll do it.
The water is
Yeah, crucial.
key. Yeah.
I'm going to have some more.
Yeah, good idea. We want to get through the
The
show.
stress is going
Yes.
up.
I wonder if you could pull out a passage here that you might read, just a paragraph
Yep.
or two, sort of at random.
I'm
No,
going to actually. I'm going to take this is the guest's privilege, I guess. I'm going to read a passage from this book.
Okay, well, let me make this a little clearer for our audience. William Sargent's going to read from this book. This is not the book we're talking about. So, but I'll hold this up so it's clear. This is called Crab Wars, and we'll talk about some of his other books in a moment, but I want to make sure that we keep these two books straight.
Okay. I'm a non-compliant guest.
You're forgiven.
You're
forgiven.
Okay. I'll tell you the setup for this. I was about 12 years old, and I was on the Cape, and I started getting very sick. And I actually went into a coma, and they brought me to the Cape Cod Hospital, and the doctors there said they didn't think there was anything they could do, and they better transfer me to the Children's Hospital. So I went up to the Children's Hospital. I was still in a coma. And I had a wonderful nurse that stayed up with me every night, and my mother would come in the morning to see if I had come out of the coma and everything. So it goes like this. First lessons, Boston Children's Hospital, 1956. Mrs. Sargent, your son is all right, but I'm afraid there's been some brain damage. He's talking some nonsense about worms, crabs, and bugs. Well, that's all right. All he ever does is talk about worms, crabs, and bugs. So they knew I was as good as I was ever going to be.
So that's your biology background started early.
Exactly. Yeah.
And I think I wasn't clearly, wasn't fully clear when I mentioned your major. I said biology at Harvard. It was
actually biological anthropology.
Biological anthropology.
And that was because biology was getting too hard for me. It was actually at a time when the big thing in biology was they were just figuring out the role of DNA and the double helix and everything like that. So it was microbiology, and it was just very intense. It was a lot of competition. You had a lot of pre-meds that were there who were just cranking it out. I was more interested in whole animal biology. And then I actually took the year off, and I worked down at Woods Hole, and I was on a cruise to Africa and South America and up into the Baltic. I was doing research on plankton. And then I came back, and I actually switched to biological anthropology, which was wonderful. I was able to take all the biology courses that I wanted to take, and I didn't have to take the organic chemistry and the hard stuff.
Become a chemist first.
Right. Yeah.
So, would you call yourself, or would you be considered, if we were in Victorian America or England, a naturalist?
Yeah, probably. Yeah. A lot of the writing that I do is basic natural history.
We talked just briefly before the show about one chapter that intrigued me.
Okay.
It's about climate change and the normal temperatures moving north through the United States, so that perhaps a central state like Illinois, which has pretty hot summer, might become almost tropical.
Right.
And the growing areas for soybeans and corn, et cetera, be pushing north farther into Canada.
Right. Yeah.
Can you tell us about that chapter and about the corn trade? I found that very fascinating.
Yeah, I did too. Because I mean, what do people on the East Coast know from corn? But it's a huge industry, obviously, and they've made incredible strides. So now, basically 2 people can work a corn farm, the size of 7 Central Parks, and make a very good living at it. I mean, a lot of people are coming back into farming because all of a sudden you can make a very good living, and you don't have you don't have to be on it 24 hours a day, 12 months out of the year. You can actually take a vacation in Florida for a couple weeks, and this is because of these huge combines that they have. That just go trundling down the fields, and they have television sets going and computers and everything like that. It's real.
And they're 40, 50, 60 feet wide.
Exactly. Exactly. Yeah. And then the other thing that they do is they no longer have to plow the fields. They will spray the fields with an herbicide, and that kills off all the weeds. But then the corn themselves have been bioengineered so they can withstand the pesticide. So the corn will grow, but the weeds will die back. So that means, you use less fertilizer, you use less pesticides. You don't have to plow the fields. So it's become, you know, this sort of incredible industry. The flip side of all of that is that, you know, we're all getting fat because we're eating so much corn fructose.
That topic occurred to you because, as all the topics do in here, because of the heat.
Because of the heat.
How did that spring to mind?
Well, if you remember, during that summer, I mean, all the agricultural land was having droughts and was, you know, in very bad shape. But corn was the worst, and the reason for that is you have to have humidity in the air so that the pollen can get from the tassels, which are in the top of the corn, down to the silk, which are in the kernels that might be a couple feet away. And if you have very dry conditions, you're not fertilizing your corn. And actually, I was doing a film about that, and I brought home a corn cob, you know, with all these sort of dried kernels on it to take some pictures of it. And then I sort of kept it around because it was kind of cool looking. And then the following spring came around and I had all these, you know, corn kernels. So I said, well, what the heck, I'll try to plant them. And I spread them around the backyard figuring maybe one or two might actually grow. And my whole backyard was, I mean, looked like Iowa.
Really?
Yeah, they all took. I think every...
because these are engineered to be so hardy?
I don't know.
You must have made the squirrels in the neighborhood very happy.
No, you know, nothing seemed to touch them. It was, I was eating corn for about 3 months.
I planted corn once, and the squirrels ate everything.
Every other year that's happened. And actually, I shouldn't admit this, I'm not a purist, but I did get some spray that, I don't know what it is, it's wolf urine or something like that, and you spray it around the garden, and it keeps the...
It worked?
Something worked. I had all my corn, and I'm still alive.
I would stay away from wolf urine, not knowing its source.
Yeah.
You've brought some other books, and I want to refer to them.
Yeah.
Let me see if I'll hold these up.
Okay.
Maybe if you could give us just a 2 or 3 line kind of précis of each book.
Yeah.
This is the one that you read from just a few minutes ago, Crab Wars, and
the subtitle of that is A Tale of Horseshoe Crabs, Bioterrorism, and Human Health. And basically, a quart of processed horseshoe crab blood is worth about $15,000. And it's used as a test for gram-negative bacteria. So anything that's going to come in contact with the human blood system has to be tested to make sure that it's not contaminated. And the way they do that is with the horseshoe crab blood.
And gram-negative bacteria are the bacteria that are becoming more and more, or subtypes of gram-negative, becoming more and more resistant to
antibiotics. Exactly.
I want to ask Casey if that's coming across. Does that look good? Okay.
Okay.
And here is Beach Wars, another violent title.
And that's the subtitle for that is 10,000 Years on a Barrier Beach. And I talk about the geological changes on a barrier beach and then interweave the story of, you know, rum runners and moon cussers and you know, pirates and everything.
Using again your background on the Cape.
You know what
the shore.
You know what this is. Cape Cod.
Cape Cod.
No, that's my left arm.
Okay, The House on Ipswich Marsh is the next book. This is a hardcover, and I'd like you to mention the text of this book and also who did the cover.
Well, my wife did the cover, and that's actually our house. It's a pink house that we bought in Ipswich, and when I bought the house, I didn't think that was probably it's an old house. It goes back to 1740, and I didn't think that was a very appropriate color, and I figured we would probably have to paint it. And I mentioned this to some neighbors, and everybody said, no, you can't change the color of that house. Everybody gives directions by taking a left at the pink house. And then, of course, I found that pink was actually a colonial color, so it stayed pink.
Your wife, by the way, is Christina Lindborg.
That's right.
Who was a guest on the Writer's Block perhaps 3 or 4 years ago.
Exactly, yeah.
and storm surge. And explain this in the subtitle, please.
This was basically, this is about, again, Cape Cod, and I grew up on a place called Pleasant Bay. And what happened in 1987 and then 2007, inlets broke in the barrier beach. And so the bay it had the equivalent of 50 years of sea level rise overnight. So the bay is now about 6 inches higher at high tide and 6 inches lower at low tide. Oh. And people lost their houses and all kinds of changes.
Are they rebuilding?
Some of them are, yes.
And this is an interesting title and an interesting cover, "The Well from Hell."
And this was about the BP spill down in New Orleans.
In the Gulf.
Exactly, yeah. And so these were the topics that I wanted to get away from.
To when you relaxed
exactly.
During the record heat.
Right, exactly.
I want to ask, because a lot of our viewers are always interested in the mechanics of writing. You're
right.
prolific. You're writing about something you enjoy. Can you tell us something about the daily procedure of writing, whether you have a set schedule or not, and
yep.
How do you work in the details of talking to the editor or sending the book out?
Yeah. Well, we were discussing this earlier. Self-publishing is made for me. My first book was with Houghton Mifflin, and then I had another one with Norton, and I had a number with the big houses. And then actually, I think it was with Storm Surge, I was trying to sell that around to some of the big houses, and finally one of the editors brought me in. He said, you'll really do better with this book if you go with a regional press or an academic press. And he was absolutely right. And then, with self-publishing, what I like about it is that you don't have to deal with editors. You don't have to sell your book, because in the old days, you would prepare a proposal. You could only send it to one editor at a time, one publisher at a time. They would sit on it for months. And then they'd tell you no, and then you had to send it. So it might be, 6 months by the time you finally got to go on the book, and by that time you were sick of it.
Life's too short.
Life is too short. When something like this is happening, like the BP spill, I feel, what can I do? I'm not a very good carpenter, so I can't go down and rebuild houses, but I do think that I have some knowledge and can write about it. And the interesting thing with self-publishing now is that when something like this happens, you can actually start writing right away and actually get something out while it's still happening. Because, after they cap the well, people are going to be on to other things.
Your press, as we've shown on a super on the screen, is Strawberry Hill Press.
Exactly.
So you are not only a writer, but you are the president and CEO of a publishing company.
Which means that you have to do all the work that 30 people used to do. I think it's basically a conspiracy to try to kill off writers.
It's working.
It's working.
I just got the 5-minute signal from Casey, okay. So I want to revisit a couple items before we leave. This is the book that William Sargent wrote about the warmest year on record, 2012. It is called The View from Strawberry Hill, and it's a very, very nicely done, readable, and highly factual book as well about that year. You remember that year. Where is this available?
This is in most local bookstores, and you can also get it through Amazon, and you can get it through Strawberry Hill Press.
So if somebody gets it through Amazon or Strawberry Hill, you will print up a copy for them.
Right.
You don't have 50,000 in a warehouse.
Yeah, that's the other.
Which is one of the advantages.
Exactly.
You're not caught with inventory that's going to sink you.
Right.
Now I just got the 3-minute signal. So I want to begin to close. I want to thank you very much for coming down this evening, William Sargent, from our neighboring community of Ipswich, and talking about really North Shore issues and world issues. Mm-hmm. And if our audience has learned something, we've done our job.
Good.
I want to thank you, along with William Sargent, for being with us tonight. We always hope to inform you about different subjects that writers are fascinated by, and if we've done something about the world climate and the North Shore's role in that climate, or reflecting of that climate, then the Writer's Block has done its job. Thanks again for being with us, and I hope to see you again next week on the Writer's Block. Good night.